Hey guys, tonight we step into a quieter, dustier time, Australia in the 19th century, where the heat sticks to your teeth. Sheep bleat from just beyond your fence line. And somewhere, not too far off, a farmer is standing perfectly still and staring at a pumpkin with a mix of reverence and suspicion. Because tonight, it's not gold or land or sheep that stirs the hearts of men. It's gourds. Specifically, the kind of gourds that weigh more than a grown kangaroo and spark rivalries so intense they threaten Sunday picnics, newspaper columns, and the fragile bonds of colonial civility. You probably won't survive this kind of drama. But that's okay, because you're not meant to. You're here to listen, gently, as the story unfolds like a slow-growing vine under the southern sun. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, leave a comment with your location and what time you're listening. I always love to see how far this sleepy little time machine reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake to the creak of wooden beams and the faint crackle of breakfast on a stove that's never quite level. Dust motes swirl in the slanted morning sun, and outside your window, if you had glass, which you don't, an old sheepdog is already scolding some unruly chickens. You swing your legs off the straw mattress and stretch, hearing your joints protest like old fence wire. You live on the edge of a not-so-bustling colonial town, where the dirt road is mostly chicken-shaped potholes and the local gossip travels faster than the post. It's a Tuesday. Maybe. You're never quite sure. But something feels off. You step out to the porch and squint toward the vegetable patch. And there it is. The largest pumpkin you've ever seen has doubled in size overnight. You didn't ask it to. You certainly didn't fertilize it. But there it is. A swollen orange miracle, glistening in the early light like it's been blessed by the ghost of agriculture itself. From next door, old Mr. Beecham leans over the fence and raises one eyebrow. "Yours grown a bit, eh?" he says. Not a question, more like a challenge. You nod slowly, looks it. He huffs and wanders off, muttering something about vinegar and treachery. You're not sure what that means, but you make a mental note to check your watering can for tampering. This is how it always begins, not with glory, but with raised eyebrows and muttered accusations. Pumpkins, after all, are not just vegetables here. They're proof that your soil is better, that your hand is steadier, that your goats don't trample everything you love. You check the pumpkin again. It has a slight lean, possibly plotting something. You wander into town later that morning, passing by Mrs. Brindle's tea shop, where the window display has somehow already shifted to autumn leaves, even though it's not autumn. Inside, local matrons sip lukewarm dandelion coffee and pretend they're not staring at the latest edition of the Colonial Grower, which features a front-page engraving of a man named Cyril holding a pumpkin the size of a canoe. You hear them whisper his name with the kind of reverence usually reserved for saints or particularly juicy melons. "He used goose droppings, I heard," one says. No, he sang to it. "Just once. I want to see a woman win." You keep walking. The town square is dotted with carts stacked high with squash, zucchini, and a frankly suspicious number of decorative gourds. Somewhere, a child is crying because he was told he couldn't carve a face into Mr. Leland's prize marrow. At the far end, a chalkboard sign in front of the general store reads, "Pumpkin Fair, 2 weeks. Weigh in at sunset. No cheating. We mean IT." You pause. So does your heartbeat. Because in your pocket, you've got a single seed left. One you were saving, just in case. The kind they say came from across the ocean. American seed. Unethical. Perhaps. Powerful. Definitely. Historians still argue whether those seeds actually produced bigger pumpkins, or whether they simply gave their planters more confidence, which in turn led to better soil practices and more aggressive watering schedules. But that's not something you worry about. Not yet. You turn back home just as the wind picks up. A dry breeze, stirring leaves that aren't quite ready to fall. Somewhere in that gust, you swear you hear a whisper. Bigger, it seems to say. Later, as the day cools and the stars begin their patient arrival, you sit on your steps with a chipped cup of something warm. Your pumpkin is still there. Silent, hulking, defiant. Roger the dog curls at your feet. You both stare at the gourd. He yawns. You nod. This means war. The next morning, you wake with a singular focus. Operation Pumpkin Domination has begun. You dress quickly. Linen shirt still damp from last night's wash. Boots that never quite dried from the last storm. And head outside with a determination only matched by your complete lack of an actual plan. Roger trots behind you, tail high, as if sensing he's about to become a footnote in pumpkin history. The pumpkin greets you like a smug monarch, still massive, slightly dewier than yesterday, and already casting shade on your struggling row of carrots. You crouch beside it, run a hand along its ribbed skin, and whisper, "We're going to make you famous." Across the fence, Beecham's laughter erupts like a kettle you forgot on the stove. Planning a parade, are we? You stand, brush your knees, and respond with the politest nod possible for someone who is now your sworn agricultural enemy. Just watering. You lie. He's holding a trowel suspiciously close to his own pumpkin, which looks a bit more orange than yesterday. You don't like that, not one bit. You fetch a bucket and head for the well, resolving to draw water more gently this time. Last week's overenthusiastic crank snapped the rope and sent a full pail crashing to the bottom. The clunk echoed for 6 minutes. You return and begin your routine, gentle pour at the base. A few muttered compliments, and, just to be safe, a bit of Roger's leftover porridge mixed into the soil. They say porridge-fed pumpkins grow sweeter, or tougher, or explode without warning. Historians still argue whether such folk methods had measurable botanical effects, or if the psychological boost to the gardener was what truly mattered. After all, hope is fertilizer too. As the sun climbs higher, you head into town for supplies, fish meal, if you can afford it, or just fish if the shopkeeper is feeling generous. The streets are abuzz. Posters for the pumpkin fair now appear on every other wall, and the blacksmith has welded together a new scale, allegedly more accurate than last year's, when someone accused a judge of leaning ever so slightly to the left. You pass 2 women comparing vine lengths with the seriousness of doctors discussing vital signs. "I told her," one says, "if it's not curling clockwise, it's not worth your compost." At the feed store, you overhear more chatter. They're bringing in outside competitors this year. What, like from Sydney? No, worse, from Tasmania. The word lands like a thunderclap. Everyone knows the soil in Tasmania is dark magic, volcanic, cursed with fertility. You drop your bag of turnip seed. The fair isn't just a hobby anymore. It's an arms race. By the time you return home, you've purchased the fish meal, a spool of soft rope for vine guidance, not sabotage yet, and a single, slightly bruised lemon you didn't need but felt guilty leaving behind. You work late into the evening, tilling the soil gently around the base, tucking loose vines with reverence, and erecting a sun shield made from an old shirt and some sticks. Roger supervises. The pumpkin looms, and then you spot something. A note, tucked under a stone by your gate. You unfold it with the care of someone who's read far too many Victorian novels. It's written in chicken scratch cursive, ink blotched, but clear enough to read. "We know what you're growing. He won't like it. Stop while you can." There's no signature, no seal, just a smudge of orange in one corner. You stare at it. The breeze picks up. The scarecrow in your field creaks ever so slightly. You burn the note. Roger barks at nothing. By the time you sit for dinner, cold beans and half a scone, you've already begun compiling a list of suspects. Could be Beecham. Could be one of the council judges, trying to weed out competition early. Could be a joke. Could be serious. The pumpkin doesn't blink. That night, you sleep lightly, dream of vines that creep under doors, of judging tables collapsing under impossible weights, of a stranger in a cloak holding a wheelbarrow and muttering about the chosen gourd. You wake before dawn and check the field. The pumpkin is still there, but so is a second note. Same handwriting. This time, it reads, "You were warned." And beside it, a half-eaten zucchini. Yours. You recognize the bite pattern. Roger sniffs it and growls. You place a hand on his back and sigh. This means escalation. You've got work to do. You rise before the sun. There's no time for hesitation now. Not with threats appearing like zucchini corpses on your doorstep. You scarf down a heel of bread, splash water on your face, and on your gardening apron like it's battle armor. Roger trots behind you, ears perked and eyes wary. He's taken to sleeping in the pumpkin patch. You didn't ask him to. He simply started doing it after the second note appeared. Perhaps he senses a threat you can't name. Or perhaps he just likes the shade. Today is not for tending. Today is for defenses. You begin by gathering broken branches from the edge of the wood. Not just any branches, twisty, knotted ones that look vaguely like they might hex someone if waved in the right pattern. You line the edge of your garden with them like primitive stakes. Next comes the noise deterrent. You string old tin spoons and copper buttons from a line between posts. It jingles in the breeze. Not musically, but suspiciously, in trustworthy notes, the kind of sound that makes chickens tilt their heads and children walk faster. And then, the pièce de résistance, scarecrow reinforcements. Your current scarecrow, Mr. Clag, has always looked a bit too pleased with himself. Today, he gets an upgrade, extra straw stuffed in the arms, a sharpened garden fork tied to one wrist, and a second face stitched on the back of his head using a discarded turnip sack. A warning both coming and going. You step back and admire your work. Merrick would be proud if he weren't busy rigging his own pumpkin cart with what he claims is hydraulic lift technology. It's just a spring and a bucket. But you don't want to hurt his feelings. Speaking of Merrick, you head into town to seek him out. He's easy to find, just follow the shouting. He's in the square, arguing with a very tall man in a cobalt blue coat and a velvet cravat that seems offensive in both climate and context. The man is holding a clipboard. You know trouble when you see it. You approach cautiously. Who's this? You ask Merrick. Inspector. He grunts. From the Sydney Agricultural Society. You blink. They have inspectors? They do now, says the man with a tight smile. Name's Halberd. Just doing a pre-fair compliance check. Safety. Hygiene. No illicit growth stimulants. You resist the urge to laugh. The only stimulant you've given your pumpkin is whispered encouragement and leftover stew. Halberd flips a page on his clipboard. You registered a specimen? You nod. Height? Unclear. Still growing. Weight? Unknown. He narrows his eyes. Any signs of irregular growth? You squint. It growls sometimes. He pauses. Pen midair. You add. Joking. He makes a note anyway. Merrick waits until Halberd leaves. Then leans over and mutters. He's not just from Sydney. He's with the Merchants Guild. The ones trying to privatize seed exchanges. You gape. They're targeting pumpkins now? Everything edible. He says grimly. And you. Especially you. This is somehow both flattering and deeply unsettling. Back at home, you return to your field to find the pumpkin unbothered by bureaucracy. It's grown another inch, maybe two, and seems to shimmer faintly in the afternoon light. You whisper praise and dab away a bit of mildew with a cloth soaked in chamomile tea. It's what your grandmother used. Or maybe she drank the tea and used vinegar. Hard to remember. You hear a rustle. Roger bolts toward the fence. Barking. You whirl around in time to see a dark shape vanish into the brush. Just a flicker of a hat. Or a hood. You give chase. But all that's left is a scuffed footprint and a bent dandelion. On your return, you notice a new addition. A carved gourd. Left in the grass near your pumpkin. It has a face. A sad face. And a tongue made from beetroot peel. You stare at it. Message? You ask aloud. Roger growls again. You place the gourd on your fence post and go inside to sharpen your pruning shears. Just in case. Dinner is distracted. You chew without tasting. The beans are overcooked. The scone is stale. And the tea tastes faintly of whatever was last stored in the pot, which might have been laundry water. That night, you dream of an enormous pumpkin, larger than a wagon, rolling gently through town as people bow in reverence. It's wearing a crown, and it speaks, in a voice made of wind. Grow wisely. Harvest with purpose. You wake sweating, clutching a spoon. Your room smells faintly of fish meal and vindication. You spend the next morning in quiet reconnaissance. Not skulking exactly, just observing with purpose. The local competition has been slow to show their hands this year. But now, with the fair just a week away, everyone's out in their patches preening like hens with new feathers. You start with Mrs. Dallamore's cottage. She's the queen of chrysanthemums. But she's been eyeing gourds lately. You spot her through the hedge, crouched beside a row of pale green orbs, humming an ominous hymn and sprinkling something from a velvet pouch. Probably bone meal, or dried optimism. Next stop, the Connolly brothers. Their plot looks suspiciously uniform. every vine spaced like a soldier in parade formation. You lean closer and spot tiny brass labels staked into the soil, humidity levels, sun intake, moral fortitude. Either they've gone scientific or they've joined a gourd-based cult. Then there's old Edgerly, who insists on growing his pumpkins under glass. It's less a patch and more a museum, with velvet ropes and a bell to ring before entry. His prize gourd wears a bonnet. You do not ask why. You return home, unsettled. Your own pumpkin is looking glorious, deep orange now, with ridges that gleam in the sun like lacquered armor. It's also humming, not loudly, but just enough to make your fillings itch. You touch it gently. It's warm, and, oddly, vibrating. Roger stares at it like it owes him money. You kneel beside it. You're trying something, aren't you? It emits a soft wub. You accept this. At midday, Merrick arrives, dragging behind him what appears to be half a cider press and 3 broken oars tied together with string. He announces this is the prototype for the pumpkin lifter Mk2. It has gears, he says proudly, gesturing at some unrelated sprockets. You raise an eyebrow. Does it lift? Not yet, he admits, but it inspires terror in the weak-wristed. You offer him lemonade. He declines, claims citrus interferes with his gourd karma. You don't press. The fair's proximity changes everything. Suddenly, everyone's pretending not to care while obsessing constantly. At the bakery, conversations end mid-sentence if you walk in. The butcher offers you suspiciously discounted marrow bones. The librarian slips you a book titled Whispers from the Soil, Espionage Among Root Vegetables. You take it home. Inside are stories from past harvest wars, mysterious blights, nighttime weeding raids, sabotage by compost. One chapter describes a man whose squash exploded due to over-fertilization and unresolved emotional trauma. You begin to worry about your pumpkin's recent emotional state. That night, you install lanterns around the patch, just little tin ones, strung up like watchful eyes. Roger patrols with the solemnity of a hired guard. You drift to sleep but wake to faint rustling. You crawl to the window. A figure, hooded, short, moving near the edge of the garden. You grab your hoe and a candlestick. Roger's ahead of you. You burst outside just in time to see the figure bolt toward the fence, but not before tossing something over their shoulder. A jar. You approach slowly. It's labeled, grow paste. Inside, a goopy, pale green substance with the texture of regret and the smell of aniseed and moss. You sniff it, nearly pass out. Roger sneezes. You mark the spot and return inside. In the morning, your pumpkin has grown another 3 inches and appears to be gently steaming. You consult your grandmother's book, Seasonal Bounties and How to Keep Them Humble. There's a recipe for de-inflating prideful melons, but it involves leeches and a priest, and neither are available. Merrick swings by mid-morning, now wearing goggles. You've been targeted, he says, examining the jar. Grow paste, illegal in most colonies, causes swelling of both fruit and ego. Is it dangerous? He shrugs. Only if you win. You bury the jar under a lemon tree. The week races ahead, every hour crammed with weeding, measuring, polishing, and paranoia. You bake a test batch of pumpkin scones using last year's reserves. They taste like hope and desperation. You eat 5. One evening, you find a note tacked to your door. We know what you've grown, and we're watching. Signed, The Gourd Watch. You frame it, the night before the fair. You kneel beside your pumpkin. Its rind is a perfect blend of orange and gold, with streaks of green that look almost like veins. It hums softly, a song only plants know. You whisper to it, not words, exactly, just comfort, reassurance. Then you kiss its crown. And for just a moment, it feels like it nods. The morning of the fair dawns early, buttery with sunrise and thick with anticipation. You don't wake up so much as snap into consciousness, heart pounding, fingers twitching, nose already trying to identify any suspicious gourd-related aromas drifting in from the window. Roger is pacing by the back door, tiny claws clicking like nervous heels on tile. His tail is fluffed, his stance protective. The pumpkin? Still intact, still humming, possibly glowing, but that could be the morning dew playing tricks on your sleep-deprived retinas. You boil water for tea and promptly forget about it. Instead, you pace. You double-check the straps on Merrick's pumpkin lifter Mk2. now equipped with padded loops and what might be a borrowed wheelbarrow axle. Merrick, when he arrives, is wearing a bandolier of tea biscuits and a sash that reads, Anti-Sabotage League. You point to the biscuits. Morale snacks, he says, dead serious. Together, you load the pumpkin. It takes both of you. And several curse-adjacent grunts. But it settles into the sling like a great sleeping beast. Merrick pats its side like it's a prized horse. I've got the reins. You handle the praise. The walk to the fairgrounds feels more like a parade. Every neighbor along the lane comes out to stare. Mouths agape, hands shielding the sun. Children wave. A dog faints. An elderly man tips his hat and mutters, "May the vines bless you, child." At the gate, you pass a very serious-looking youth in an official sash labeled Squash Marshal. He inspects your entry ticket, then your pumpkin, then you. Name of gourd? You hesitate. Clarabelle. Merrick mouths. Clarabelle? You whisper back. It felt right. The marshal nods. Proceed. You roll into the main exhibition tent, where rows of enormous produce already glisten like waxed deities under the filtered sunlight. There's a cabbage the size of a bassinet, a beet that looks like it might contain multitudes. And, of course, the pumpkins. Your rivals are all present. Mrs. Dallimore waves sweetly, but her smile is tight. The Connolly brothers are fiddling with calipers. Old Edgerly is muttering into a silk fan. You position Clarabelle on her display plank, adjusting the cloth underneath with almost paternal care. Then you wait. The judging takes place after lunch, which gives you too much time to imagine scandalous backroom deals and poisoned measuring tapes. You nibble a sandwich. Merrick eats an entire roast hen. The judges are three, one in an actual robe, one with a monocle, and one who smells strongly of mint and mischief. They glide from entry to entry, murmuring and jotting notes. When they reach Clarabelle, there is a prolonged silence. One judge leans in, another gently taps the rind, the third closes their eyes and inhales. Then they move on. You try not to vomit. The results are scheduled to be announced at precisely 3:17 p.m. for reasons no one understands but everyone respects. The crowd gathers, pressed tight in the viewing pen, eyes flicking between the grandstand and the sky, as if weather might influence outcome. You grip Merrick's sleeve. I can't feel my knees. He offers you a biscuit. Won't help. You mutter. The head judge steps forward. He unfolds a scroll. The crowd hushes like a well-trained choir of mice. And the winner of this year's Grand Gourd Challenge. You exhale hard enough to blow your own hair back. For excellence in shape, hue, and inexplicable presence. A pause so long you briefly suspect sabotage by dramatic irony. Goes to. You close your eyes. Clarabelle. You scream. Not loudly, but enough to startle the Connolly brothers and cause Mrs. Dallimore to drop her parasol. Clarabelle is given a crown. Not metaphorical. A literal tiny crown, forged of ribbon and tin, placed atop her noble stem. Your photo is taken beside her. Merrick poses, holding her side like a prized fish. Roger sneaks into the frame, licking his own paw with unearned pride. The applause is modest but sincere. There are no riots. Only a low murmur of either jealousy or awe, you're not sure. But you accept both. Later, you're handed a certificate, a small silver coin, and a jar of celebratory pickles from the mayor. You thank her and vow to remember the brine of triumph. As the sun sets, you and Merrick begin the journey home, pushing Clarabelle slowly down the lane. She gleams in the fading light like a champion long foretold. Feels good, you say. Merrick nods. Clarabelle's got the heart of a warrior. And a surprisingly symmetrical shape. Roger meows from his perch atop the wheelbarrow. You roll past the bakery, where a new sign has gone up, now featuring champion pumpkin tarts. You roll past the butcher, who winks and asks if you'll be entering next year. You roll past your own front gate and pause. Do we bring her in? You ask Merrick. He considers. No, she belongs outside tonight. Let the stars know what she's done. You leave her under the apple tree, crown gleaming, her orange bulk majestic against the dark. You sleep deeply, and dream of vines curling into crowns. You wake up to dew, bird chatter, and the mild, unshakable dread that something, or someone, might have stolen Clarabelle in the night. You throw on boots, dash to the garden, and skid to a halt. She's still there, untouched, glorious, slightly damp, but with an air of relaxed dignity. Like a duchess sunbathing, Roger sits on top of her, tail neatly wrapped around his paws, surveying the yard like a squash bodyguard. You breathe a sigh of relief. Not that you expected pumpkin thieves. But, well, it's Clarabelle, and people have started whispering. Merrick arrives an hour later, holding 2 celebratory danishes and a sheet of local newspaper, folded to the gardening section. The headline? Pumpkin Palooza. Local gourd stuns judges. Sparks debate. There's a photo. You, Merrick, Roger, and Clarabelle, all looking strangely regal for a vegetable portrait. She's famous now, Merrick says, handing you the paper like a sacred text. Signed it for my aunt. You peer at the article. The judges apparently described Clarabelle as exceedingly rotund, suspiciously orange, and hauntingly balanced. You decide it's a compliment. Then you spot a quote from Mrs. Dallimore. We're not saying it was unnatural. But in all my years of marrow cultivation, I've never seen a pumpkin wink. Merrick shrugs. Bit rude. Clarabelle never winked. She smized. You're about to launch into a defense of pumpkin integrity when a letter arrives. Delivered by bicycle courier. In a wax-sealed envelope. No less. The return address is the National Botanical Curiosity Society. Your eyebrows raise in tandem with Merrick's. Do you think they want an interview? He asks. You crack the seal. Pull out the letter. It's on thick parchment. The sort that smells like beetroot ink and educational prestige. They want to visit. 3 representatives. 1 horticulturalist, 1 folklorist, and 1 historian of competitive agriculture. They'd like to examine Clarabelle. Possibly take measurements. Possibly sketch her. You glance at the pumpkin. She seems unfazed. You write back, agreeing to the visit, but only under the condition that no samples will be taken, no seeds stolen, and all observers remove their shoes before entering her immediate radius. 2 days later, they arrive. The folklorist is wearing a cloak. The historian carries a pocket watch that he consults frequently. As if Clarabelle might ripen out of spite. The horticulturalist, Drive, Tansy Gorse, is brisk, efficient, and visibly thrilled. She's perfect, she says, circling the pumpkin with reverence. Not too symmetrical, not too blotched. She has presence. The historian nods, noting that the last time such a fruit drew this kind of acclaim was in 1873. When a turnip in Tasmania allegedly inspired a minor political party. The folklorist opens a notebook. Any dreams? He asks. You blink. Excuse me? Dreams. Since she arrived. You think. Well, Merrick had one where she rolled into Parliament and demanded universal composting. Fascinating. He whispers, scribbling furiously. The visit lasts hours. Measurements are taken. Stories exchange. Diagrams drawn. Clarabelle is photographed from every angle. Roger included for scale. By afternoon tea, Dr. Gorse announces that Clarabelle may be eligible for entry into the Registry of Nationally Significant Gourds, a ledger so exclusive it only admits produce with cultural or historical resonance. You feel honored, slightly confused, mostly delighted. She'll need to remain untouched for 72 hours. The folklorist says. For observation. Roger looks offended, but you comply. You rope off the area. Merrick constructs a small awning. Someone suggests candles. You veto it, fearing fire and unintentional pumpkin seances. That night, people begin to visit. Neighbors, cousins, curious bakery patrons. They shuffle through your garden like art critics in a gourd-themed museum. She's so round, one whispers. I heard she cured a rash. Says another. Someone lights incense. You don't stop them. Merrick begins selling commemorative buttons. Roger sells nothing but offers judgmental stares. By the second evening, things are getting reverent. You catch someone bowing. You institute a no-kneeling policy. But still, the mood has shifted. Clarabelle is no longer just a champion pumpkin. She's become a symbol. Of what? You're not sure. Resilience? Autumn? The stubborn beauty of homegrown oddities? Maybe all of it. Historians still argue whether Clarabelle's brief cultural reign was organic or merely the product of gourd-related hysteria. One later theory posits that the town, coming out of a particularly dull season, simply needed a distraction. Another claims she triggered a subconscious yearning for simpler joys, something orange and honest in an increasingly confusing world. You suspect it was the sheen. People love a glossy finish. Regardless, for those 3 days, Clarabelle reigns, quietly, nobly, like the squash queen she is. On the morning of the fourth day, Dr. Gorse returns. She checks Clarabelle's rind, nods in approval, and hands you a certificate. Provisional listing, National Gourd Registry. Clarabelle is official now. You feel a bit like a page at court, holding her reins with pride. That night, as the garden empties and the visitors dwindle, you sit beside her in the twilight. Merrick brings tea. Roger, a grasshopper. You all toast softly, not to fame, not even to vegetables, but to the rare, strange joy of growing something that mattered, even just for a little while. You wake up the next morning to an unfamiliar sound. Silence. The garden is empty. No rustling of visitor feet. No murmured odes to curvature. No incense floating mysteriously through the rosemary. Clarabelle stands alone, regal and serene in the morning light. Roger is asleep under the pumpkin's shade, his tail twitching with the confidence of a feline who has guarded greatness. You sip your tea slowly, watching a bee land briefly on Clarabelle's crown. Even the insects seem to acknowledge her presence now. Merrick ambles up, yawning, and hands you a slice of toast. I think we've hit the apex, he says, mouth full. It's all downhill from here. You nod, not sadly, just truthfully. Even cultural icons need rest. There's a knock at the garden gate. It's Mrs. Dallimore, but not the usual version, the competitive, scowling, marrow-wielding gourd gladiator. No, this Mrs. Dallimore looks softened. She's holding a pie. Pumpkin, of course, but a humble one. Flaky crust and all. She clears her throat. I thought maybe you'd like to share this. For educational purposes. You look at Merrick. He blinks. Clarabelle is not on the menu. He says firmly. Mrs. Dallimore snorts. Please, this is from my own patch. Jeremy the Third. You let her in. The three of you sit around the garden table. The pumpkin looming behind like an honored relative who doesn't speak but listens very intently. You try the pie. It's good. A bit too much nutmeg, but solid. The crust is buttery. You talk about soil composition, fungal threats, the merits of cow manure versus compost tea. It's the first real conversation you've had with her that didn't involve subtle threats or veiled bragging. She eyes Clarabelle after the third slice of pie. Still thinks she's got a secret. She mutters. You nod. Most stars do. She chuckles. And for the first time, you suspect Mrs. Dallimore might actually be human under all that competition. By midday, the town newspaper prints a follow-up article. Pumpkin peace accord reached over pie and tea. The headline is a little dramatic, but the sentiment is real. The National Botanical Curiosity Society sends a follow-up letter. Clarabelle's listing is made permanent. She's now one of only 11 vegetables in Australia with cultural and agricultural distinction. The others? A carrot that grew in the shape of a bishop's crook. A beetroot that allegedly spelled help in its reigns. And a courgette that survived 2 bushfires and a territorial goose. Clarabelle is in good company. You start getting letters. Some are from local schools asking if they can visit. One is from a poet in Queensland who's written a 42-stanza ballad in Clarabelle's honor. Another is from a cheesemaker in Victoria, offering to send a wheel of aged cheddar as tribute. You accept the cheese. One letter, though, is different. It's from a man named Neville Trench. A serious name, a serious hand. He writes, Dear Grower, I am the keeper of the Pumpkin Ledger, a semi-secret and completely unofficial network of competitive pumpkin cultivators stretching back to 1842. We believe Clarabelle may be the fulfillment of a prophecy once scribbled in the margins of a 19th-century Tasmanian seed almanac. Would you consider hosting the next gathering of the Gourds? You read it 3 times before passing it to Merrick, who laughs so hard he nearly chokes on a scone. A gourd prophecy. He wheezes. Finally, you respond with a polite yes. Why not? A month later, the gathering of the Gourds takes place in your back garden. 23 growers arrive, some by train, one by donkey. They come bearing stories, seeds, jam jars labeled with strange things like ghost melon essence and patty pan whisper blend. They bring photos of past giants, riddles written in compost ink, and tales of pumpkins that glowed under moonlight or hummed when harvested. There's a secret handshake. You learn it. Clarabelle watches over it all. No one tries to outshine her. They just circle respectfully, ask questions, take notes. One woman, dressed in saffron robes and smelling faintly of cinnamon, sings her a lullaby. Merrick provides tea. Roger supervises the food table. The event ends with a ceremonial naming of future hopes. Each grower writes the name of their next pumpkin to be on a slip of paper and plants it beneath a lemon balm bush. To sprout intention, you write Clara II, then cross it out and write Clarabelle II, Gourd harder. Everyone approves. Historians still argue whether the gathering was a whimsical oddity or the genuine rebirth of a forgotten society. Some claim it was performance art. Others see it as agricultural folklore made real. You don't care either way. Because under the string lights, surrounded by people who once thought pumpkins were just soup fodder, you feel something rare, connected, muddy, slightly sunburnt, but connected. And Clarabelle? She rests. Content, revered, slightly composted at the edges. As all legends must, the seasons begin to shift. Cooler breezes curl around your ankles in the mornings now, and the sunlight feels a little lazier as it spills across Clarabelle's broad back. The bees that once hummed a symphony of praise have moved on to hardier blooms. Even Roger naps more and patrols less. Autumn has arrived. You can feel it not just in the air, but in the pace of things. The town's fascination with Clarabelle settles into something quieter, less spectacle. More reverence. People still stop by the gate, but instead of snapping photos or delivering poetry, they just pause, look, nod, like they're paying respects to a local monument. Which, technically, she is. Merrick suggests building a little bench beside her, something for visitors to sit on and contemplate life's great squashes. You agree. Together, you cobble one from salvaged timber and 2 retired wheelbarrows. It's wobbly but honest. Clarabelle begins to change too. Not dramatically. There's no sudden wilting or implosion, but her color softens. Once orange skin slowly fades to a deeper amber, speckled with patches that whisper, "I'm done growing, dear." Her crown tilts ever so slightly. You don't need Merrick to tell you what that means. Clarabelle is nearing her end. But unlike most vegetables, her exit feels earned, not tragic, not wasteful, just the final act of a long, unlikely performance. Historians still argue whether Clarabelle was ever truly the largest. One 1870s diary entry from a Sydney gardener claims he grew a pumpkin the size of a canoe, mistaken for a beached whale. But that diary was written entirely in verse and may have been satire. Or wishful thinking. No one really knows. What they do know is this: Clarabelle brought people together, stirred old rivalries, sparked forgotten clubs, and inspired both ballads and benchmaking. Not bad for something that started as a seed lost behind a compost bin. You and Merrick discuss what to do when her time comes. There are options, of course. Preserve her, hollow her out and turn her into a garden shed. Harvest her seeds and begin anew. Turn her into soup, though you quickly veto that one. It feels a bit like making lasagna from Stonehenge. Ultimately, you decide on something gentler. Let her rest where she grew. Build a small arbor over her spot. Plant herbs and flowers around her base, lavender, thyme, maybe even some pansies, because they always look mildly scandalized, which feels appropriate. And beneath it all, leave the soil undisturbed. Let her return, quietly, to the earth. You mark the date on the calendar. Clarabelle's farewell. The morning of the farewell arrives with unexpected warmth. It's one of those golden days that pretends summer is still visiting. Just for a bit, the air smells like fallen apples and distant wood smoke. People gather, not hundreds, but enough. Mrs. Dallimore arrives with scones and a ribbon pinned to her coat that reads, "Friend of Gourds." She doesn't cry, but her eyes mist a little when she pats Clarabelle gently and whispers, "Well played." Roger curls beneath the pumpkin one last time, his tail flicking like a metronome. Merrick gives a speech. It's exactly the kind of sleepy, meandering speech Clarabelle would have loved, part gardening advice, part poem, part musings on compost as a metaphor for forgiveness. The crowd listens, not in silence, but in that soft stillness reserved for Sunday afternoons and forgotten birthday cards. You speak next, though your voice trembles a bit. You talk about growth. About how something so simple, so round, can become the center of so much story. About how maybe, just maybe, we give things meaning not because they're grand, but because they let us gather around them. A few people clap. One woman sneezes and blames emotional pollen. Then it's time. The bench is moved aside. A small wooden plaque is placed in the soil nearby, hand-carved with a sunflower and the words, "She grew with grace." You place your hand on Clarabelle's cool, dappled skin one last time. And then, you let her go. Not dramatically, not with trumpets, just with a sigh, and a thank you. Over the next week, the garden settles. Life returns to its quieter rhythms. No more newspaper reporters. No more letters asking if you'll tour Clarabelle internationally. As if airports would know what to do with her. Merrick starts pruning the basil again. You replant lettuce where the crowd once stood. Roger finds a new napping spot behind the compost. But something lingers. Not sadness. Something gentler. A kind of calm. As though the garden itself remembers. And approves. One evening, as twilight stretches across the sky in long lilac streaks, you find a small sprout near Clarabelle's resting place. Just a leaf. Round. Vibrant. Unmistakably pumpkin. You and Merrick crouch beside it. Could be a weed, he says. Could be Clarabelle's great-grandchild. You reply. Roger sniffs it, then sits beside it like a furry little sentinel. You decide not to label it. Not yet. You let it grow. Because some stories don't end. They simply seed. You wake the next morning with sore knees. A faint sunburn from Clarabelle's farewell. And the kind of calm that only comes after something enormous, both literally and emotionally, has passed. The sprout still stands. A single, hopeful leaf shaped like a mitten, wobbling faintly in the breeze. Roger's already there, guarding it like it's got royal blood. You begin calling it Pip. Merrick rolls his eyes, naming plants before they bloom. He mutters, but he still clears space around Pip with a tenderness that betrays him. Pip becomes the quiet center of your garden. You tend it with the same care you gave Clarabelle, but not the same hope. This time, there's no contest, no weight chart pinned to the fence, no weekly measurements. Pip just grows, slowly, naturally. Historians still argue whether it was Pip that started the post-Clarabelle movement in backyard gardening circles, a return to smaller, simpler crops, free of the need to impress neighbors or newspaper clippings. One article in a rural magazine claimed Pip symbolized the rise of humble horticulture, though others say it was just a very average vine in a particularly poetic era. Regardless, Pip grows. Meanwhile, the town changes in subtle ways. The Pumpkin Society officially disbands. Their final meeting takes place in Mrs. Dallamore's shed, where they drink tepid cider and vote unanimously to retire with grace. She sends you the society's ledger, a pair of novelty shears, and a letter that simply says, "No regrets. But never again." The local grocer starts stocking squash varieties you've never seen before. One even resembles a pale green eggplant but tastes like cinnamon. You try it out of curiosity. It's awful, but it makes you laugh. Roger adopts a new routine, napping beside Pip in the mornings, patrolling the fence line like a sleepy little knight, and occasionally bringing home strange souvenirs, a dead glove, a piece of ribbon, a single boot with no pair. Merrick plants chamomile. You know, he says, just in case someone someday wants a calming tea after all this squash-related drama. It's a good idea. The weather turns brisk. Leaves tumble across the soil like forgotten thoughts. The garden browns, sleeps. You and Merrick begin building the arbor you dreamed of. The one that will shade Clarabelle's resting place come spring. It's not fancy. 4 posts. A gently curved top. Ivy to come. But it's solid. You string bells along the crossbeam, not loud ones. Just little bronze ones that tinkle faintly in the wind. Like laughter you almost forgot. The neighbors stop by more often now. Not to gawk or gossip, but just to sit, to listen, to ask about Pip, to share how they've started growing things again. A man with no teeth tells you about his grandfather's pumpkin soup. A teenager asks if she can paint Clarabelle's plaque for a school project. You say yes. Merrick carves a new sign for Pip's patch, no expectations. Just photosynthesis. It becomes a bit of a town motto. You hang it crooked on purpose. It feels more honest that way. One chilly morning, you find a note tucked under Pip's leaf. It reads, "Thank you for growing things that mattered. J." You never figure out who wrote it. Merrick suspects the grocer. Roger suspects the mailman. You suspect the old man with the eye patch who never speaks but always smells faintly of marmalade. Doesn't matter. The note joins the others. Because yes, There are others now. Tucked under stones, left in boots, folded into seed packets. Tiny thank you notes to a pumpkin that didn't change the world, but maybe shifted a few back gardens into slightly better alignment. You spend more time outdoors. Not gardening, necessarily, just being. Watching birds hop across the trellis. Listening to wind whisper across the fencing. Tracing Roger's paw prints through damp dirt. Thinking about how rare it is to grow something with no agenda. Just care. Merrick starts making pumpkin bread again. This time without performance anxiety. He leaves warm slices on neighbors' porches. One morning, you find an entire loaf from someone else on your own. You slice it, butter it, eat it on the bench beside Pip. Crumbs dusting your lap like snowfall. Clarabelle would be proud. You whisper. Pip doesn't reply, but its leaves flutter slightly. You take that as agreement. By late autumn, the nights turn sharp. You cover Pip with a small quilt when frost threatens, a ridiculous gesture. Maybe, but it makes you feel better. Roger curls beside it like a heat lamp with fur. One morning, you notice something new. A bud. Tiny. Green. Barely there. But it's real. Pip has decided to bloom. You don't make an announcement. You don't measure or photograph or notify the gardening club, what remains of it. You just sit beside Pip with your tea, watching that little bud grow. One day at a time. No charts. No pressure. Just possibility. You hum a tune you don't remember learning. The bells above the arbor tinkle faintly in rhythm. Merrick brings out a blanket and a biscuit. Roger purrs in his sleep. And the garden, once again, grows quiet, but not empty. Never empty. The days shorten. You wake now to a kind of silvery light, half sun, half mist, that clings to the trees like shawls. Your boots crunch over frost-blistered leaves. And even the birds seem slower. Their songs quieter, as if they too are conserving warmth. Pip's bud grows, inch by careful inch. No one talks about it much. It's just there, a gentle reminder that things continue. Life, even when tucked under quilts and surrounded by dead stems, finds a way to push upward. You start a journal, not the kind where you track weights and soil acidity, but the softer kind. You write things like, Roger stole my sock again, or Merrick made soup that didn't taste like punishment. Sometimes you write poems, very bad ones, mostly about squash. Historians still debate the sudden popularity of pumpkin journaling in late 19th century rural Australia, where dozens of handwritten volumes have been found containing entries like, felt the wind sigh today, sounded like Clarabelle's final breath, or saw a cloud shaped like a gourd. Took it as a sign. Some call it a literary movement. Others suggest people were just lonely and cold. Merrick builds a cold frame out of old window panes. For seedlings, he says, though you haven't planted any. You pretend to believe him. He just wants a reason to tinker. The neighbors bring soup now. Real soup. Thick, root vegetable stew that steams in mismatched bowls. No one talks about contests or yields or newspaper clippings. They just say things like, thought you might like this, and smells like autumn. Doesn't it? You light a lantern at twilight and hang it from the arbor's center. Not because it's dark, but because it's comforting. The kind of glow that makes your breath catch when you see it from the road. The little pumpkin continues. Still unnamed, still small, but somehow just right. You and Merrick debate what to call it over tea. He suggests pod. You counter with gleam. Roger bats a walnut toward the stem and meows. Walnut, Merrick says. Done. You both laugh. But the name sticks. Walnut the pumpkin. It's perfect. You bake for the first time since Clarabelle. A rustic loaf with too much cinnamon and not enough structure. It collapses slightly on one side, but smells heavenly. Roger tries to steal it. Fails. Sulks. Merrick declares it, your best disaster yet. You put a slice in front of Walnut. Just for show. The frost glitters on the quilt. The wind stirs the bells. And you find yourself smiling without realizing it. A letter arrives. From the coast. A woman named Gertrude, who claims to have grown a pumpkin, so round it rolled down the hill into a tavern. She heard about Clarabelle from a traveling wool merchant. She writes, your story made us cry. Not from sadness. Just the hugeness of it all. You place the letter beside Pip's sign. The neighbors start writing too. Not formal letters, but notes on scraps of fabric. Bits of ribbon, painted stones. They leave them tucked between fence posts or under garden pots. Planted again today. Still thinking about Clarabelle. Hope is orange. You don't know who leaves which. You don't ask. It's enough that they're there. One evening, Merrick hosts a garden reading. He lines up mismatched chairs and asks everyone to bring a passage about growing things. Some read poetry. Some bring recipes. One child recites a fictional biography of Walnut in which he becomes mayor of a small town made entirely of compost. You serve warm cider with cloves. Someone knits a tiny scarf for Pip. You gently remove it after they leave, but hang it from the arbor. It flutters like a flag. Roger starts sleeping next to Walnut now, curled like a crescent moon around the base. You worry he'll squish it. He doesn't. Your dreams soften. Less about contests, more about fields. Less stress, more color. In one, Clarabelle grows wings and flies over the town, scattering seeds like snowflakes. You wake laughing. Should I be worried? Merrick asks over porridge. Only if she comes back with a vengeance. You say. The frost hardens. You build a windbreak out of burlap sacks and old curtains. It flaps and sags and mostly fails at being aesthetic. But Walnut remains cozy. Merrick carves a tiny lantern and tucks a candle inside. The flickering light makes the pumpkin glow from the inside, like it's dreaming. 2. You sit beside it with a blanket. Steam curls from your mug. Roger sniffs the air. The bells on the arbor jingle faintly. Someone hums. You don't know if it's you, Merrick, or the garden itself. But it doesn't matter. Because Walnut is here. The wind is kind. And everything feels enough. The frost comes thicker now. You wake to a world dusted white. The garden crusted in ice like an over-sugared tart. Every stem wears a rhyme. Every fence post glitters. Roger steps outside, puts one paw on the ground, and promptly reverses back into the house with great offense. Walnut endures, tucked under straw, flanked by lanterns, surrounded by offerings, a tiny fortress of warmth. You check the stem each morning, pressing gently with your fingers. Still firm, still pulsing with its quiet, stubborn life. You begin to count your days by that press. There's no great harvest this year. No thunderous cart wheeling down the street. No banner raised or weights tallied. But what you have is a single pumpkin with a name, a few friends who bring soup, and a cat who has claimed the wheelbarrow as his personal lounge. Historians still debate whether the decline of the competitive squash scene in 1890s Australia had more to do with shifting agricultural priorities or a collective return to sanity. Some cite Clarabelle's legacy. Others cite frostbite. You no longer feel the need to win anything. But you do start sketching. Little drawings in your journal, of Walnut. Mostly. But also of Clarabelle. Of Merrick holding a rake like a scepter. Of Roger mid-pounce. Of neighbors smiling awkwardly as they hand you burnt muffins and call it support. The sketches are bad. Exceptionally bad. Merrick frames one and hangs it in the shed anyway. Titles it Emotion over Technique. You leave it there. You write a letter back to Gertrude. Tell her about Walnut, about the scarf, about the mayoral compost town. You sign it with a wax seal in the shape of a gourd, which took you 2 hours to carve and looks mostly like a lumpy boot. Still, it feels right. Pip's sign, now faded, still stands. One morning you see someone kneeling beside it. A young man in a felt coat, tucking a small sprig of rosemary under the signboard. You don't interrupt. He doesn't explain, just tips his hat and walks on. Later, you find a scrap of paper weighed down with a pebble. To honor the quiet things, you place it next to your worst sketch. They belong together. The house smells like cloves and old wood. Merrick's taken to boiling orange peels just for the scent. You suspect he's nesting. He denies it. Roger has gained winter weight. He now thuds rather than leaps. Occasionally he tries to sleep on Walnut. You intervene gently. The neighbors whisper that your garden feels like a chapel. Not in a religious sense, but in the way people lower their voices when they step inside. As though the plants might be listening. One neighbor asks if you'll ever grow a giant again. You look at Walnut, at the straw, at the quilt still fluttering from the arbor. Maybe, you say, but not for trophies. They nod. You bake again. A spiced pie this time. Not from Walnut. He remains strictly ornamental, but from canned puree and a touch of molasses. You share slices with everyone who ever wrote a garden note. Someone plays fiddle near the arbor. Badly. Roger yowls in protest. You feed him pie crust to hush him. You host a reading of the Pumpkin Journal. No one expected it to have chapters. Certainly not 17 of them. Merrick reads chapter 5 in a dramatic whisper while you hand out cider. Day 12. He intones. Roger meowed at Walnut. Unclear if it was warning or flirtation. It gets a laugh. A good one. You smile without thinking, without worrying, without imagining judges or weights or damp tape measures. The frost deepens. The light thins. Walnut glows under his quilt. You light the lantern beside him. You say goodnight. Not every night. Just the ones where the stars are particularly clear and the wind is particularly gentle. You begin to feel something you haven't felt since Clarabelle. Readiness. Not for another contest, but for the new season. For rest. For beginnings that don't have to be loud or triumphant to matter. You and Merrick sit by the hearth, shelling roasted chestnuts. Roger sleeps with one paw over his face. You don't talk about next year's plans. Not yet. That can wait. For now, the only thing on the calendar is this. Tend, think, sleep. You wake one morning and Walnut is no longer growing. He isn't dying. He's just content, settled into his final shape like someone exhaling after a long stretch. The skin has toughened. The color has deepened to that burnished golden russet tone you once saw on a cathedral door. There's a peace to it. A full stop at the end of a good sentence. You take the morning slow. Warm porridge with plum jam. Merrick hums something that may or may not be a hymn. Roger perches on the windowsill, tail flicking, watching frost melt into dew. You've started drying herbs again. Not out of urgency, but tradition. The smell of thyme and lavender now lines the hallway. And visitors comment that your house smells like a wizard who's taken up baking. The calendar says it's nearly winter solstice. That means mulled cider, patchy gloves, and the annual we'll sneak into the churchyard and decorate the weathered angel statue contest, which isn't official. But everyone knows it's Merrick. He denies it. Every year, you stop by the market and notice something new. Tiny pumpkins, orange and green and striped, nestled in straw like sleeping kittens. Sold not for pies or stews, but for decoration. You buy 3. One is misshapen. You name it, mini walnut. Historians still argue whether the decorative gourd trend began as a reaction to agricultural overabundance or simply as an expression of collective whimsy. Either way, you approve. Pip's sign now has frost crystals lacing its edges. Someone added a drawing of Clarabelle in charcoal. It's rough, but familiar, her crown rendered like a sunburst. You leave a biscuit at the base. Roger tries to claim it. You flick him on the ear. Gently. At the edge of your garden, the old weighing stones have begun to sink. Merrick suggests turning them into a table. You say, only if you carve Walnut's name into it. He agrees. Later that week, a stranger knocks. Youngish, wears mismatched gloves, carries a canvas satchel bulging with something flat. Turns out, paintings, watercolor ones, delicate, loose, mostly flowers and sheds and fences and sky. He says he's been traveling, collecting stories, heard about Pip's sign, heard about Walnut, wanted to see for himself. You invite him in. He drinks tea with too much honey, asks polite questions, takes out a small sketchbook and does a study of Roger, who tolerates it only because of buttered toast crumbs. He says he'll be painting a quiet series. You don't ask what that means. You just nod. Sometimes, the most important things are the quietest. You find an old ribbon in a drawer, sun-bleached and frayed. Tie it gently around Walnut's stem. Merrick raises an eyebrow. You say it's his medal. No ceremony? He asks. You consider. Just breakfast. So you make scones. Share them with the neighbors. One brings apple butter. One brings news about their cat, also fat. Also insufferable. You laugh and say Roger could use a nemesis. The laughter feels old and deep and earned. Someone suggests a winter lantern walk. Not official. Just a quiet procession through the neighborhood. Lanterns swinging. No talking. Just breathing in steps and the soft sound of frost crackling under boots. You say yes. It feels right. You make your lantern from an old jam jar and pressed leaves. Walnut gets one too. A tiny one, nestled beside his quilt. As the procession weaves past your garden, people pause, lower their lanterns. Some nod. One tips their hat. No words. Just reverence. Not for size. Not for spectacle. But for the ordinary miracle of growing something. Later that night, Merrick lights a candle in the windowsill. Just in case, he says. You don't ask for what you know. Roger curls beside Walnut. The quilt has slipped a little. You fix it. Whisper. Good job. You think he hears you. By midwinter, the garden is buried in soft silence. Frost clings to every twig, every stubborn weed, every forgotten bootprint like nature has taken up embroidery. Even Roger walks more delicately now, leaving smaller paw-shaped shadows in the whiteness. Walnut does not flinch from the cold. He sits proudly, as if he was carved from amber, wearing his sun-bleached ribbon like a relic. The quilt, slightly damp and crunchy with ice, has become part of his legend. Merrick refers to it as textile mulch. You threaten to knit him socks just to punish the vocabulary. Inside, the hearth crackles, the same chair squeaks, the same kettle whistles. But something has shifted, not in routine, but in rhythm. You find yourself pausing more, listening to the wind move through the eaves, noticing how the butter knife warms in your hand after resting on the windowsill. Your neighbor stops by with a basket. She's knitted you a hat. It's too small, lopsided. A pom-pom has tragically been sewn inside. You wear it anyway, because love is rarely symmetrical. She also brings a letter, folded thrice, sealed with wax that's cracked like old tree bark. It's from someone named Edwin, across the river, who's heard of the great pumpkin and is requesting permission to come sketch it with reverent care and a traveling stool. You laugh. Merrick snorts. Roger eyes the envelope like it owes him money. You write back, bring biscuits. Pumpkin doesn't pose for free. A week later, Edwin arrives, and so do others. A trickle of artists, letter writers, retired postmasters, and at least one woman who claims to be Walnut's godmother from a past life. You suspect she just wants cider. They come with thermoses and thermals and notebooks and wide eyes. They kneel in the snow. Sketch. Whisper. Once, someone tries to sing to Walnut in Latin. You stop them gently. This is a no-chanting garden. The visits never last long. 10 minutes. 15. Just enough for admiration and a quick biscuit. But it's enough to warm something. You realize Walnut has become a pilgrimage site, not for glory, not for grandiosity, but for the gentle kind of hope that only comes from seeing something persist through absurd odds. You wonder if other vegetables inspire such emotion. Merrick says turnips do, but only ironically. Historians still argue whether the mass romanticization of vegetables in the 19th century stemmed from genuine agrarian awe or a lack of anything better to do during long winters. You say it's both. Roger receives a knitted scarf from a teenage admirer. He bites it once, dramatically, and then wears it for 3 days straight like royalty. That afternoon, as you boil potatoes and hum whatever tune is stuck in your teeth, someone knocks at the back door. It's a child, eyes wide, cheeks pink, hands tucked under their armpits. They don't say much, just stare past you at Walnut, then press a note into your hand. On it, a crayon drawing. A slightly wobbly pumpkin with an enormous crown and what may be a sword. You tape it to the pantry. Later, you find Merrick sitting outside beside Walnut, snow brushing his shoulders, reading aloud from a worn novel. He says it's for educational enrichment, but you hear the voices wobble when a particularly tragic chapter unfolds. You leave him there, not out of indifference, but respect. Some things are better witnessed than interrupted. That night, you dream again, but not of storms or contests or crumbling fences. Just Walnut, sitting quietly, and the garden, alive with spring green shoots. Little chickadees bouncing like notes across the trellis, and the faint sound of someone laughing without realizing it. You wake with the faintest taste of soil and hope. By early spring, the snow begins its slow retreat. First from the stones, then from the flower beds, and finally from Walnut's base, which emerges like a thawed monument, damp, speckled with pine needles, and still, somehow, magnificent. The frost has not cracked him. The thaw has not soured him. He sits there, a bit softened, a bit leaner around the ribs, but alive as a giant vegetable can be. Merrick taps him twice, then listens with exaggerated seriousness. Still beats with the rhythm of a well-fed drum. He says, "You snort into your tea." The pilgrimages become a trickle again. Spring is planting season. There are gardens to till and seeds to scatter and spades to misplace. But those who still come bring wildflower bouquets and travel-sized harmonicas. A toddler arrives dressed as a gourd. Roger does not approve of the harmonica. He tries to bury it in the compost heap. You spend your days pruning, scrubbing winter off the porch, and coaxing peas into their trellises with whispered bribes. The soil smells rich again, sweet, loamy, worm-breathed. One morning, you spot a sprout beside walnut. Just one, tiny, bright, in defiance of his shade. You let it be. Could be family, Merrick says. Could be rebellion. Either way, it's not yours to interfere with. You wonder if Walnut knows. If, somehow, this old swollen champion of cucurbits understands his time is folding inward. You wonder if he minds. He doesn't shrink from the sun, doesn't flinch when birds land on his back. He just sits, absorbing, radiating some faint, unknowable joy. That week, a letter arrives from the same agricultural bureau that laughed you off nearly a year ago. This time it's different. They're sending a representative, a Mr. Pilchard. You don't know if that's a surname or a warning. The letter is polite, almost reverent. They wish to verify the state and stature of the specimen in question. You pin it to the wall beside the child's drawing. Merrick prepares for war. He polishes the garden gate, sharpens all the pencils, irons a shirt, which Roger immediately sits on. Presentation matters, he says, brushing biscuit crumbs off his collar. This is no ordinary fruit visitation. This is judgment. You tell him to calm down. That this is good, recognition, legitimacy. But part of you feels it too. That odd twisting anticipation. The sense that something's ending, or starting, or turning into something that used to be small and private, and is now something else. Mr. Pilchard arrives precisely 1 hour late. He wears a hat shaped like authority and shoes that creak with unfamiliarity. His notebook is 3 inches thick and covered in diagrams. You think he blinks more than necessary. But that might just be nerves. He approaches Walnut, stops, stares. He circles 3 times, once clockwise, once counter, once diagonally. Then he kneels. He does not touch the pumpkin. He measures, mutters, squints. At one point, he emits a soft whistle. Remarkable, he says. You resist the urge to curtsy. After 30 silent minutes, he nods once and declares, he is now officially recognized. Merrick demands a certificate. Pilchard hands him a ribbon instead. Heirloom excellence. It reads. The font is dignified. The shimmer is minimal. You attach it gently to Walnut's stem with a single bobby pin. That evening, there's no celebration, just a quiet supper. Stew, crusty bread, tea with lemon if you squint. You and Merrick sit on the porch. Roger naps in a flower pot. Walnut rests beneath the stars. Like always, no one makes speeches. There's no need. Recognition doesn't make him more real. It just confirms what you already knew. That something planted with care and stubbornness can, in time, become more than just a vegetable. It can become a story, a neighbor, a kind of quiet monument to absurdity and patience. You think of last year's letter. The smudged ink, the mocking tone, the way you crumpled it with such delicate rage. You think of all the people who came to see, to marvel, to share thermoses and stories and wonder. And then you think of tomorrow, of the seeds in your pocket, of the patch waiting just beyond the trellis. New season, Merrick says softly. You nod. Walnut shifts slightly in the breeze. And if you didn't know better, you'd swear he sighed. You rise early the next morning. Earlier than usual, even by garden standards. The dew hasn't lifted yet. The air clings to you, soft and cool, smelling faintly of mint and damp bark. Roger is already up, of course, snuffling through his old familiar patrol routes like a mustachioed general. You tiptoe past Walnut. He looks peaceful, maybe a little smaller, or maybe that's just the way the light lands now. Golden, tentative, like it's trying not to wake the day too harshly. Your steps lead you to the far end of the garden, where you turned the soil yesterday. Where a new patch waits. It's square and humble, nothing fancy, just dirt and possibility. You kneel, and, like every year, you begin, one seed at a time, fingers pressing them gently into the earth, like tucking in old friends. Your thoughts drift as your hands work. You remember the markets, the arguments, the neighbors peering over fences pretending not to care. You remember the sneers, the support, the stories whispered late into the muggy evenings. You remember that awful week of frost panic, the rescue tarps, the heated tea passed back and forth like a sacred flame. You remember how quiet he was. And how much noise he created. By mid-morning, the new seeds are nestled and watered. The soil is warm, ready to dream. You sit beside Walnut, towel in hand. You wipe away a bit of last night's dew. And for a moment, he looks polished, regal, ready. He's not going anywhere, not yet, but you know time has its plans. By afternoon, the visitors resume. A school group, 3 pensioners, 1 man dressed as a gnome who refuses to break character. Merrick sells a small batch of walnut-shaped scones he claims are a tribute. Not a pun. People sit, people smile. Some bring their own pumpkins for comparison. Others just listen. There are stories now. They tell them in murmurs, as if afraid to wake the vines, of the pumpkin that brought peace to a town. Of the great weigh-in scandal. Of the time someone tried to launch a rival in a wheelbarrow lined with silk and ended up in the duck pond. Some are true. Some are absolutely not. No one seems to care. By dusk, the garden hums. Lanterns flicker gently in the trees. A neighbor plays something soft on a fiddle that has more squeak than melody. The sky bleeds pink and blue, like bruised cotton candy. You sit beside Walnut one last time that evening. His ribbon stirs slightly in the wind. His crown tilts with the dignity of an aging knight. You run your fingers over his side, warm still, beneath the shell, and whisper, "Good season." The sun slips beneath the hedge. The stars prick the sky. And Walnut rests, not alone, not forgotten, but surrounded by stories. The wind picks up, a little chillier than before. You stand. The garden folds inward for the night. And you follow its lead. So now you sit back, wherever you are, and let the last images fade like summer mist. No more pumpkin drama. No more nervous weather checking or mulch debates or midnight whisperings about award committees. Just the quiet weight of satisfaction. The kind that settles into your shoulders and says, "You did something ridiculous, and it mattered anyway." You picture Walnut in moonlight. A soft silhouette, round and familiar, with a crown like a storybook cane. Still, gentle, content. The garden sleeps too. Leaves fold into themselves. The path remembers your steps. The soil breathes slowly, deeper than you thought soil could breathe. You remember how it all began. A letter, a scoff, a single seed pressed into the ground on a dare and a hunch. Now, you know better. Nothing planted with hope ever stays small. You breathe in slowly. Let it out through your nose. Let your shoulders drop. Let the tension trickle down your spine and into the mattress or blanket or quiet space where you rest. Let the story end where it needs to. Not with applause, not with grandeur, just with rest. You close your eyes. The garden rocks you gently. The wind hushes your thoughts. And Walnut? Walnut keeps watch, just in case you dream of him. End of script. Sweet dreams.